The irony is that I went there to build a fortress. I wanted layers of muscle to hide behind, a physical armor so dense that nobody could see the trembling thing underneath. The gym is supposed to be a place of construction, of adding mass, of becoming harder. The air smells of iron and stale effort, a chemically sharpened atmosphere where we perform masculinity until our hands bleed. But I learned the hard way that the heaviest thing you will ever lift isn't the barbell loaded with plates. It's the truth you're trying to sweat out of your system. I thought I was forging a shield, but every rep was just stripping me down, preparing me for a vulnerability I never asked for. My routine was a religion, practiced with the desperate piety of a man trying to save his own soul. Every evening at 6 o'clock, I walked through those double glass doors, and I put on my costume. It wasn't spandex or a lifting belt. It was a posture. Shoulders rolled forward just enough to look busy, headphones clamped over my ears like a seal against the world, and a gaze fixed permanently on the floor or the middle distance. I wore oversized hoodies, pulling the fabric loose around my stomach, checking the mirror not to admire the progress, but to ensure the disguise was holding. I had convinced myself that size equaled safety. It's a common lie we tell ourselves in the dark. If I could just occupy more space, if I could make my silhouette imposing enough, then maybe the world would stop feeling so dangerous. Maybe the anxiety that hummed in my chest like a faulty wire would be silenced by the sheer density of my traps and deltoids. I looked at the other men in the free weights section, the ones who moved with an easy, heavy grace, and I wanted what they had. Not the strength, exactly, but the indifference. The ability to exist in a room without apologizing for the space you take up. But the gym is a lonely place, even when it's crowded. Perhaps especially when it's crowded. You are surrounded by bodies, by the heat of exertion and the sound of breath, yet you are entirely isolated within your own set count. We were all ghosts haunting the same machines, moving in parallel lines that never intersected. I liked it that way. I cultivated that isolation. I treated the bench press like a solitary confinement cell where I held the key. The physical sensation of lifting became a narcotic, but there is a specific clarity that comes when you are under a heavy load. When gravity is trying to crush your chest, your mind doesn't have the luxury of wandering. You can't worry about your loneliness or your inadequacy when you are fighting to push 200 pounds off your sternum. The pain is clarifying. It drowns out the noise. For 45 seconds at a time, I wasn't a nervous wreck of a man trying to pass as confident. I was just a machine of levers and fulcrums. I perfected the gym face, that blank, slightly aggressive stare that says, "Don't talk to me." I moved from the squat rack to the cable machine with rigid efficiency, never lingering, never resting too long, terrified that if I stopped moving, someone might actually see me. I was safe in the motion, in the predictable agony of the workout. The soreness the next day was a comfort. It was proof that the disguise was holding. The mirrors were the hardest part. The gym is a hall of mirrors, reflecting you back at yourself from every angle. You can't escape your own image. I learned to look without seeing, to focus on the form, the angle of the elbow, the depth of the squat, without ever making eye contact with my own reflection. Because if I looked too closely, I might see the fear behind the focus. I might see that the man in the mirror was just a scared kid wearing a grown man's muscles. This was my life. This was the safe, sterile world I had constructed. A world of steel and silence, where I was in complete control of the variables. I could calculate the weight, the reps, the rest time. There were no surprises in the iron. It was perfect. It was sustainable. It was exactly what I needed to survive. And it worked perfectly, right up until a Tuesday in November when the rhythm broke. The routine I had spent years perfecting, the invisible barrier I had erected between myself and the rest of humanity, didn't just crack. It dissolved. And it didn't happen because of a catastrophic injury or a sudden realization. It happened because of a disruption I never saw coming. He wasn't the biggest guy in the room. In a space dominated by men trying to inflate themselves into parade floats, he didn't take up an aggressive amount of cubic footage. But he occupied the space in a way I couldn't understand. I first saw him not directly, but as a ghost in the reflection of the lateral pull-down machine. The gym is a hall of mirrors, a fragmented reality where you watch the world over your shoulder, and there he was, framed perfectly between a rack of dumbbells and a structural pillar. What caught my attention wasn't his size, it was his stillness. Everyone else in that room was vibrating with a frantic energy, pacing between sets, checking phones, shaking out limbs, constantly performing the act of doing. But this stranger sat on the edge of a bench press with a terrifying kind of ease. He wasn't checking his reflection. He wasn't scrolling through a playlist. He was just sitting there, comfortable in his own skin, breathing as if the air belonged to him. It was a quiet confidence that felt louder than the slamming of weights. I watched him with a mix of envy and suspicion. My own body felt like a cage of nervous ticks. I was constantly adjusting my hoodie, tugging the sleeves down over my wrists, shifting my weight from foot to foot because stillness felt like exposure. But he moved with a fluid grace that made my rigid routine look like a panic attack. He lifted the dumbbells with intention, not aggression. There was no grunting, no throwing the weights down to announce his strength to the room. He just did the work, and then he rested. It irritated me. It felt like a personal affront that someone could be that at peace in a place I found so hostile. I tried to ignore him. I turned the volume up on my headphones until the bass rattled my skull, trying to build a sonic wall to block out his presence. I focused on the knurling of the bar in my hands, the rough steel biting into my calluses. Focus, I told myself. You are here for the work. You are here to build the wall. But the awareness lingered. It's a strange sixth sense you develop in the gym, the feeling of gravity shifting in the room. Even with my eyes fixed on the floor, I knew where he was. I could track his movement through the periphery of my vision, a blur of gray t-shirt and calm motion. He was a variable I hadn't accounted for, a frequency that disrupted my signal. I found myself timing my sets to his, resting when he lifted, lifting when he rested, caught in a subconscious orbit I hadn't agreed to. Then, the accident happened. I was finishing a set of rows, breathless and red-faced, the kind of exertion that leaves you feeling stripped and raw. I stood up, catching my breath, and I made the mistake of looking into the main mirror that spanned the far wall. He was looking at me, not past me, not through me to check his form in the glass behind me. He was looking directly at my reflection, and he didn't look away when our eyes met. Gym etiquette is a strict code. You can look, but you cannot stare. If eyes meet, you nod and break contact immediately. You acknowledge the other male presence, establish that there is no threat, and retreat to your island. But he didn't nod, and he didn't look away. He held the gaze for a second, maybe two. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't the "what are you looking at" stare of a guy looking for a fight. It was curious. It was open. In that split second, the noise of the gym fell away. The clatter of plates, the terrible techno music, the roar of the ventilation. It all dropped into a vacuum. There was just the silence of being seen. I felt a flush of heat that had nothing to do with the exercise rise up the back of my neck. It was the terrifying sensation of being perceived, truly perceived, by someone who wasn't buying the costume. He wasn't looking at the armor I'd built. He was looking at the man hiding inside it. I broke the contact first. I tore my eyes away, staring down at my water bottle like it contained the secrets of the universe. My heart was hammering against my ribs, an erratic, frightened rhythm. I grabbed my towel and moved to a different section of the gym, putting 3 rows of machines between us. I tried to shake it off, to tell myself I was imagining things, that he was just zoning out, and I happened to be in his line of sight. But the air had changed. The gym, which had always felt like a vast, lonely cavern, suddenly felt incredibly small. The distance between the machines didn't feel like enough anymore. I kept my head down, pulling my hoodie tighter, but the back of my neck burned. I knew, with a sinking certainty, that the anonymity I treasured was gone. The distance between the machines didn't feel like enough anymore, and worst of all, I wanted him to look again. The decision to go heavy wasn't about training. It was about erasing. I needed to obliterate the memory of that eye contact with something undeniable. I marched to the bench press, the altar of the gym, and I started loading plates with a kind of frantic precision. 2 plates a side, then a 10, then a 5. I was building a monument to my own capability. I needed to feel the crushing weight of the iron so I wouldn't have to feel the crushing weight of being seen. I lay back on the bench. The world narrowed down to the ceiling tiles, and the knurled steel bar hovering above my eyes. This was my safe place, the point of no return. I gripped the bar, my knuckles turning white, and took a breath that expanded my ribs against the vinyl bench. I unracked the weight. It was heavy, heavier than I expected, but I told myself it was fine. I controlled the descent, the bar touching my chest with a gentle tap. Then I tried to push. The bar moved 3 inches and stopped. It hit an invisible ceiling. I pushed harder, my triceps screaming, my feet digging into the rubber floor, but physics had turned against me. The weight wasn't moving. And then the panic set in. It's a cold, sharp spike of adrenaline that hits you when you realize you are trapped under your own ambition. The bar started to sink back down. I was going to be pinned. I was going to be the guy who needed to roll the bar of shame down his stomach while the whole gym watched. The humiliation burned hotter than my muscles. I closed my eyes, bracing for the crush, for the inevitable crash of metal on bone. But the weight didn't fall. A shadow fell over my face, blocking out the harsh fluorescent lights. I opened my eyes and saw him. He was standing over me, looking down from an inverted angle. He hadn't panicked. He hadn't shouted. He had simply stepped into my space, his hands hovering just beneath the bar, creating a safety net I hadn't asked for, but desperately needed. "Drive," he said. His voice was low, a rumble that I felt in my chest as much as I heard it. "I'm right here. Drive." He didn't lift it for me. That's the important part. He didn't steal the rep. He placed his fingers under the bar, applying just enough upward pressure to counteract gravity, just enough to let me fight through the sticking point. I pushed. I gritted my teeth and pushed with everything I had left, and the bar began to move again. But in that struggle, time distorted. I became hyper-aware of his presence. I could smell him, not the acrid sweat of the rest of the gym, but something clean, like dryer sheets and faint citrus. I could feel the heat radiating from his hands, inches from my face, inches from the bar. It was an intimacy that felt illicit. Here I was, vulnerable, flat on my back, my chest exposed, my strength failing, and he was the only thing standing between me and disaster. The bar clicked into the rack. The sound echoed like a gunshot, signaling the end of the danger. I lay there for a second, gasping for air, my arms trembling from the effort. He didn't move away immediately. He stayed leaning over me, his hands still resting on the bar, checking to make sure it was secure. For a moment, we were locked in that small, private space, the rest of the gym blurring into the background. "You had it," he said, and a small smile touched the corner of his mouth. It wasn't a mocking smile. It was a conspirator's smile. Just needed a little steer. "Thanks," I managed to choke out. My voice sounded thin, foreign to my own ears. "Anytime, Yada," he said. "I got you." He straightened up and walked away, back to his own workout, as if he hadn't just saved me from a public execution. But those 3 words lingered in the air long after he left. I got you. Spotting is a transaction of trust. You are handing over your safety to a stranger, believing that they won't let you get hurt. It's a physical contract. But this felt different. As I sat up, wiping the sweat from my forehead, I realized the dynamic had shifted irrevocably. I had tried to prove I didn't need anyone, and instead I had been forced to accept help. The physical weight was racked, cold and stationary on the metal hooks. But a different kind of weight had just settled onto my shoulders. The heavy, terrifying weight of letting someone in. I watched him across the room. He was doing pull-ups now, the muscles in his back shifting under his shirt. He didn't look back at me. He didn't need to. The connection had been made. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was a tether. And for the first time in years, I wasn't just lifting iron. I was lifting the sudden, heavy possibility that I wasn't as alone as I wanted to be. The days following that Tuesday didn't return to normal. How could they? The ecosystem of the gym is delicate, built on a foundation of mutual ignoring, and we had violated the prime directive. We had acknowledged each other's existence. The anonymity I used as a shield was gone, replaced by a hyper-awareness that made the hair on my arms stand up every time the automatic doors slid open. We slipped into a new dynamic, one that was arguably more torturous than being strangers. We became gym nod guys. It's a standard masculine ritual. The chin lifts half an inch, the eyes meet for a fraction of a second, and the contract is signed. I see you. You see me. We are both here doing the work. But with him, the nod felt heavy. It wasn't casual. It felt like a secret pass between us in a crowded room, an acknowledgement of the debt I couldn't pay back. I became a cartographer of his location. I didn't need to look up to know where he was. I could feel the gravity of him. If he was at the squat rack, the air in that corner of the room felt denser, charged with a static electricity that made my skin prickle. I found myself subconsciously tracking his workout, counting his reps in my head while I tried to focus on my own. My routine, once a mindless meditation, became a performance. Every set I did felt like an audition. Was my form perfect? Was I lifting enough? Was I sweating too much or not enough? I was convinced he was watching every rep, grading my worthiness to be in his space. The interactions were microscopic, yet they felt seismic. There was the dance of sharing equipment. One evening, we both reached for the 30-pound dumbbells at the same moment. My hand brushed against his, just the briefest friction of skin against skin, and I pulled back like I'd touched a live wire. "All yours," he said. His voice was calm, devoid of the territorial aggression that usually permeates the free weights section. "Thanks," I muttered, grabbing the weights and retreating to a bench 3 rows away. My heart hammered a rhythm that had nothing to do with cardio. It was ridiculous. It was adolescent. But the physical memory of that accidental touch lingered on my hand like a burn. I sat there, doing bicep curls I didn't need to do, wondering if he felt the current too, or if I was just projecting my own desperate loneliness onto a man who was simply being polite. That was the battleground, my own mind. I projected every insecurity I had onto him. In my head, he was the judge and the jury. When he looked in my direction, I assumed he was critiquing my lack of size, my nervous energy, the way I hid inside my clothes. I told myself he had spotted me out of pity, that he saw me as a charity case, a weakling who needed saving. I built a narrative where his kindness was actually condescension. It was safer to believe he looked down on me than to entertain the terrifying possibility that he was looking at me. But he kept breaking the script. The tough guy armor has a specific look, a scowl, a hardened jaw, a refusal to show pleasure. He didn't wear it. One night, between sets of deadlifts, I saw him check his phone and laugh. It wasn't a performative laugh. It was genuine, a soft sound that cut through the grinding industrial noise of the gym. He looked up, caught me watching him, and instead of hardening his expression, the smile stayed. He offered it to me, open and unguarded. It disarmed me completely. I was ready for judgment. I wasn't ready for warmth. That smile didn't fit the story I was telling myself. It suggested that the tension wasn't about weakness or pity. It suggested a camaraderie I didn't know how to handle. The air between us wasn't just heavy with sweat and iron anymore. It was thick with something unspoken, a question hanging in the suspended dust motes. I couldn't take the noise of the main floor anymore. The clanging weights and the aggressive posturing felt too loud, too chaotic for the quiet storm brewing in my chest. I needed space to breathe, somewhere the air wasn't quite so charged with his presence. I grabbed my water bottle and headed towards the back of the gym to the stretching mats. It was usually empty there, a quiet zone away from the fray. I thought I was retreating to safety, moving to the periphery where I could fade back into the background. I didn't realize I was just setting the stage for the walls to come down completely. The stretching area is the gym's confessional. It's the one place where the posturing has to stop, simply because you cannot maintain a facade of invincibility while you are lying on a foam roller, grimacing in pain. If the free weight section is about building the armor, the mats are where you acknowledge the cracks. It's quieter back there, the lighting usually a little dimmer, the air smelling less like adrenaline and more like exhaustion. You are horizontal, exposed, often eyes closed, surrendering to the ache you've just inflicted on yourself. I was trying to disappear into the corner, focusing on the tight, burning line of my hamstring, when I felt the floor shift. I didn't need to open my eyes to know it was him. There is a specific displacement of air that happens when he enters a space, a magnetic pull that realigns the room. I heard the soft thud of a mat being unrolled next to mine. Not across the room, not at a respectful, stranger-appropriate distance. Right next to me. Close enough that if I reached out my hand, I would brush against his arm. I kept my eyes fixed on the ceiling tiles, counting the perforations, trying to slow my heart rate. It wasn't working. The proximity was overwhelming. On the gym floor, we were vertical, guarded moving objects. Here, we were still. We were level with the ground. The hierarchy of strength dissolved, leaving only two tired bodies occupying the same small square of rubber flooring. I could hear the rhythm of his breathing as it slowed, the deep, controlled exhales of a man coming down from a high. "You push hard," he said. The voice seemed to come from the floor itself, low and resonant. I turned my head, just an inch, just enough to see him. He was stretching his triceps, his arm pulled across his chest, looking at the ceiling. He wasn't looking at me, which somehow made it easier to answer. "It's the only way it works," I said. My voice sounded rough, scraped dry by dehydration and nerves. "Does it?" he asked. He turned then, dropping his arm and resting on his side, facing me. "Work, I mean?" It was such a simple question, but it felt like he was dismantling me with a screwdriver. He wasn't asking about the hypertrophy or the rep range. He was asking about the strategy, the survival mechanism. "I don't know," I admitted, and the truth of it surprised me. "It keeps the noise down." He nodded slowly, as if this made perfect sense. He sat up, crossing his legs, and reached for his toes. The movement caused his shirt to ride up slightly, exposing a strip of skin at his lower back. I looked away, quickly, focusing on my own shoelaces, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. "I used to lift like I was angry at the weights," he said, his voice thoughtful, like I was trying to punish the bar. "But you can only sustain that for so long before something snaps." I was stretching my shoulder, rotating the joint, when I flinched. It was a microscopic movement, a sharp intake of breath as the old rotator cuff injury flared, but he caught it. His eyes narrowed, not with judgment, but with a sudden, sharp focus. He reached out, a reflex perhaps, and his hand hovered near my shoulder before dropping back to his side. "You're guarding that side," he observed. It wasn't a question. "Old injury?" "Years ago," I said, rubbing the spot. "It never really healed right. I just work around it." "You're carrying a lot of tension there," he said softly. The observation felt dangerous. It implied he had been watching closely enough to map the topography of my pain. He wasn't talking about the deltoid anymore. "It's exhausting, isn't it? Holding it all up?" The air between us went still. The background noise of the gym, the distant clatter, the thrum of the treadmill motors, seemed to fade into a white noise hush. He was looking right at me, and his expression was terrifyingly open. He saw the fatigue, not the physical tiredness of a workout, but the deep, marrow-level exhaustion of performing strength when you feel fragile. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time I didn't try to harden my face. I let the mask slip just for a second. "Yeah," I whispered. "I'm tired." The word hung there, heavy and undeniable. He didn't look away. He didn't offer a platitude or a "no pain, no gain" slogan. He just held my gaze, acknowledging the weight of the confession. "Then don't," he said. "Not here." He stood up then, the moment breaking as he rolled up his mat. But the energy had shifted. We weren't just two guys stretching anymore. We were two people who had just acknowledged the game we were playing. He offered me a hand to pull me up, a simple gesture, gym etiquette. But when I took it, the grip was firm, grounding. He pulled me to my feet, and for a split second, we were standing too close, chest to chest, the heat of his body radiating against mine. "Locker room?" he asked, stepping back. "Yeah," I said, my voice barely working. "Locker room." We walked toward the changing rooms in silence. But the silence was different now. It wasn't a wall. It was a bridge, and I was terrified to cross it. The locker room is a different kind of theater. If the gym floor is where we perform strength, this is where the costumes come off. The air was thick, heavy with steam, and the sharp, medicinal smell of deodorant and soap. It's a humid purgatory where the boundaries of personal space dissolve into the damp tile. The noise is different here, too. The metallic slam of locker doors, the hiss of showers, the unfiltered echo of voices bouncing off hard surfaces. It is a place of aggressive exposure, and walking into it with him felt like walking into the center of a spotlight. We found a row of lockers near the back, away from the main thoroughfare. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a stark, unflattering glare that left no shadow to hide in. I moved automatically, spinning the combination lock, opening the metal door to retrieve my bag. I wanted to change quickly, to put layers back on, to cover the skin that felt too thin to hold me together. But he moved with that same maddening, deliberate slowness. He sat down on the wooden bench, untying his shoes, seemingly oblivious to the tension radiating off me like heat. I sat down next to him. The bench was narrow. The distance between our knees was measured in inches. In the gym, I could pretend there was a chasm between us, but here, the proximity was suffocating. I pulled my hoodie off, feeling the cool air hit my damp shirt, feeling small. I expected him to ignore me now, to revert to the silent code of the locker room, where you stare at the floor and get out as fast as possible. "I used to hate this part," he said. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his hands, resting loosely between his knees. The stopping, the quiet after the noise. I paused, my shirt half unbuttoned. "I thought you loved it. You look like you own the place." He laughed, a short, dry sound that lacked the confidence I had assigned to him. He looked up then, turning to face me. His eyes were tired. The invincibility I had projected onto him, the idea that he was a man made of steel and certainty, cracked. "I don't own anything," he said quietly. "I come here because if I don't, the noise in my head gets too loud. The weights are just volume control." The confession hung in the humid air between us. It was a devastation. I had spent weeks building him up as the adversary, the judge, the perfect specimen of everything I wasn't. I had assumed his silence was arrogance. I had assumed his strength was natural, effortless. But here he was, sitting in his gym clothes, admitting that he was just another man running from his own ghosts. He wasn't the monument I had built. He was just a guy trying to survive his own mind. "I thought you were watching me because I was doing it wrong," I admitted. The words tumbled out before I could check them. "Because I didn't belong." He shook his head, a slow, deliberate movement. "I was watching you because you remind me of me, before I realized that nobody else cares what weight is on the bar." He leaned back, resting his elbows on the locker behind him. The posture was open, defenseless. The aggressive masculinity of the gym floor had evaporated, leaving behind something raw. We sat there for a moment, in the midst of the chaos, the sounds of other men laughing, shouting, living their lives, but we were in a bubble of absolute stillness. I looked at him, really looked at him, not as a symbol, but as a person. I saw the scar on his chin, the fatigue in his posture, the way his hands weren't quite steady. "It's just armor," he said, gesturing vaguely at the room, at the muscles, at the performance of it all. "It's heavy to carry around." "Yeah," I breathed out. "It is." I finished changing, pulling on my street clothes, but the ritual felt different. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was just getting dressed. The fierce urgency to escape had been replaced by a strange, terrifying reluctance to leave. Being near him, in this stripped-down state, felt more real than anything I had experienced in years. "See you tomorrow?" he asked as I slung my bag over my shoulder. It wasn't a casual dismissal. It was a request. "Tomorrow," I confirmed. I walked out of the locker room, back through the glass doors and into the cool night air. My body felt lighter, the soreness in my muscles a dull, pleasant hum. I had left the gym, but I hadn't escaped. I had walked in to build a wall, and for the first time I had let someone take a brick out. It was terrifying. It was the most dangerous thing I had ever done, and I couldn't wait to do it again. The panic hit me in the safety of my own car. It wasn't the adrenaline crash of a workout. It was the sickening shock of realization. I had broken the cardinal rule of my existence. As I drove home, the lightness I had felt leaving the locker room curdled into dread. I had exposed the soft underbelly of my insecurity to a man I barely knew, and the shame felt worse than any physical weakness. I convinced myself it was a mistake, a momentary lapse induced by exhaustion. I decided right then that I needed to reset. I needed to rebuild the distance. I didn't go back the next day. At 6 o'clock, I forced myself to stay on the couch. I told myself I was taking a rest day, but it was a retreat. I sat in my apartment, surrounded by the silence I claimed to love, waiting for the relief to come. But the quiet felt hollow, a vacuum sucking the air out of my lungs. My mind was back in the free weight section, wondering if he was looking at the door, or if he hadn't noticed at all. By the second day, the withdrawal was physical. It wasn't just the lack of endorphins. It was the lack of him. I realized that isolation wasn't protecting me anymore. It was a cage. I tried to bargain with myself. I rolled out a yoga mat on my living room floor, doing push-ups until my arms shook, trying to prove that I didn't need the gym. But it was pantomime. Without the risk of being seen, the movement felt empty. I lay on the carpet, staring at the ceiling fan, and finally admitted the truth. I missed the tension. I missed the terrifying charge of occupying the same space as him. I had gone to the gym to become self-sufficient, but I had learned that strength is not a solitary act. You cannot measure your own growth in a vacuum. I needed the witness. On the third day, I packed my bag. My hands were trembling. This wasn't just a workout anymore. I wasn't going back to lift weights. I was going back to face the possibility that I was wanted. The automatic doors parted, and the familiar smell of rubber and ozone hit me. But the atmosphere had shifted. The gym didn't feel like a sanctuary or a battleground anymore. It felt like a waiting room. The air was charged, thick with an intent that had nothing to do with lifting weights. I didn't put my headphones on. I didn't pull my hood up. I walked onto the floor exposed, carrying nothing but the nervous rhythm of my own heart. I found him immediately. He wasn't hard to find. He was the only stillness in a room full of motion. He was standing by the cable tower, resting between sets, looking at the door. He didn't look surprised to see me. He looked like he had been counting the seconds. There was a consistency to him, a gravitational pull that made the rest of the room blur into insignificance. He didn't wave. He just held my gaze, anchoring me to the spot. I walked toward him. It was the longest walk of my life, navigating through the maze of benches and machines. Every step was a decision to keep going, to ignore the instinct that told me to turn around and run back to the safety of my isolation. I stopped 3 feet away from him, close enough to feel the heat radiating off him, close enough to see the question in his eyes. "You weren't here," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, delivered with a quiet intensity that cut through the noise of the gym. "No," I said. My voice was steady, surprising me. I wasn't. "Rest days are important," he said, giving me an out. He was offering me a polite excuse, a way to keep the armor on, to pretend this was just about fitness. I shook my head. It wasn't a rest day. I got scared. The confession hung in the air between us, heavier than the stack of plates on the machine next to him. I saw his eyes widen slightly, a flicker of surprise at the honesty. In this place, we admit to physical weakness, to a failed lift, a pulled muscle, but we never admit to emotional cowardice. "Scared of what?" he asked softly. He took a step closer, closing the distance until we were standing inside our own private perimeter. "Of this," I said, gesturing vaguely at the space between us. "Of being seen. I spent a long time building a version of myself that didn't need anyone. When we talked in the locker room, I felt the wall coming down, and I panicked. I thought if you saw the real thing, the weak thing underneath, you'd realize you were wasting your time." He looked at me for a long moment, studying my face with that same terrifying, dismantling focus he had used on the stretching mats. Then he smiled. It wasn't the polite gym smile. It was the smile of someone who has just found something they were looking for. "You think you're the only one pretending?" he asked. "I didn't spot you because you were strong. I spotted you because I saw someone fighting the same war I am. It's heavy, man. I'm just looking for someone to help me put it down for a while." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the wind out of my lungs in the best way possible. He wasn't looking for perfection. He wasn't looking for the fortress. He was looking for the person hiding inside it. "I'm not doing a set tonight," I said. It was the final surrender. "Me neither," he said immediately. He reached for his towel, wiping the sweat from his neck. "I know a place that has terrible coffee, but great booths. It's quiet." "Quiet sounds good," I said. We walked out of the gym together. We didn't look back at the weights, at the mirrors, at the frantic performance of masculinity we were leaving behind. The cool night air hit us as we stepped onto the pavement, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to hunch my shoulders or hide my face. I realized then that the body is just a vessel. It's the house, not the home. The real connection wasn't about the iron we lifted. It was about the weight we were willing to share. I went to that building to construct a fortress of muscle, convinced that invulnerability was the only way to survive. I spent years adding layers to keep the world out, only to find that the strongest thing I ever did was let someone in. The gym doors clicked shut behind us, muting the clatter of the weights, leaving us in the silence of the real world. That was the moment I learned that vulnerability isn't a weakness. It's the heaviest lift of all. If you want to see more stories about finding connection in unexpected places, subscribe to the channel.